I clutched my wine glass tighter as my mother gushed about Jake's new mansion to our entire extended family. The monthly dinner I'd been dreading had turned into exactly what I feared, another showcase of my brother's success. Dad beamed proudly, describing marble countertops and backyard pools while relatives nodded approvingly. I sat quietly, invisible as usual, despite running my own multi-million-dollar real estate company. When Mom suddenly turned to me with pitying eyes and asked if I wanted to stay at Jake's mansion until I got back on my feet, something inside me finally snapped. Growing up in suburban Chicago, I lived in Jake's shadow. Our modest 4-bedroom house in Evanston became a shrine to my brother's achievements. The living room wall displayed dozens of Jake's baseball and football trophies. His MVP certificates and newspaper clippings covered the refrigerator. Meanwhile, my straight-A report cards and academic medals were tucked away in a drawer, occasionally mentioned but never celebrated. Jake pitched a no-hitter today, Dad would announce at dinner, his voice swelling with pride. Coach says he might get scouted for college teams next year. That's wonderful, Mom would respond, serving Jake an extra portion of lasagna. Sophia, pass the salad to your brother. Athletes need proper nutrition. I was 13 when I won the regional science fair with my project on urban development patterns. The ceremony was scheduled for 7 in the evening on a Tuesday. We'll try to make it, sweetheart, Mom said that morning. But Jake has a scrimmage game. You understand, right? I understood perfectly when I stood alone on the stage, accepting my gold medal while scanning the audience for faces that weren't there. Later that night, I listened to them gush about Jake's 2 runs while my certificate sat unopened on the kitchen counter. High school brought more of the same. I joined the debate team, student council, and honor society while working weekends at a local bookstore. Jake focused exclusively on sports, his grades barely keeping him eligible for the team. He's just not academically inclined, Mom explained to relatives, but he's got such natural talent on the field. No one ever questioned why that excuse wasn't extended to me when I struggled with physical education classes. My high school graduation should have been my moment. I was valedictorian with a full academic scholarship to Northwestern. But during my speech, I spotted my parents in the audience looking distracted, whispering excitedly to each other. Later I discovered why. Jake had just received his acceptance letter to University of Illinois with a partial baseball scholarship. Can you believe it? Dad said at my graduation dinner, which quickly became a celebration of Jake's college acceptance. Our boy got into U of I. The coach says he might even start as a freshman. I worked 3 jobs that summer before college. Mornings at a coffee shop, afternoons at an office doing data entry, and weekends continuing at the bookstore. Meanwhile, my parents took Jake shopping for dorm supplies, bought him a new laptop, and gave him their old car. Sophia's always been so independent, Mom told Aunt Margaret when she asked why I was working so much. She likes earning her own way. The truth was, I had no choice. My scholarship covered tuition and partial room and board, but I needed to make up the difference and cover my living expenses. No one had offered to help. At Northwestern, I discovered my passion during a real estate development course. Something clicked when learning about urban planning, market analysis, and investment strategies. I applied for an internship at Lakefront Properties, a boutique real estate firm specializing in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood. We usually take graduate students, said Tanya Williams, the firm's founder, during my interview. But your analysis of our recent developments impressed me. You see patterns others miss. Tanya became the mentor I desperately needed. A self-made success in Chicago's competitive real estate market, she recognized something in me that my own family never had. Potential. You have an eye for value that can't be taught, she told me after I identified an undervalued property that the firm later flipped for a 40% profit. Keep developing that instinct. I graduated summa cum laude, with a business degree and a minor in urban planning. My parents attended the ceremony, but left early to attend Jake's baseball game. By then, I'd stopped expecting anything different. I accepted a position at Lakeshore Real Estate Group, living in a tiny studio apartment in Uptown, while saving every dollar I could. My plan was clear: learn everything about the industry, save aggressively, and make my first investment within 3 years. After 18 months of 70-hour work weeks and extreme frugality, I had nearly enough for a down payment on a small condominium in an up-and-coming neighborhood. Then came the family dinner, where everything changed. "Jake's buying his first home," Mom announced proudly. "Such a beautiful condo in Lincoln Park. 2 bedrooms with a view of the park." "We helped him with the down payment, of course," Dad added. 20% down means no PMI. Always smart to invest in real estate early." I nearly choked on my water. After years of being told I needed to make my own way, they had given Jake a substantial sum for his down payment. When I mentioned I'd been saving for my own place, the response was immediate. "Buying property in Chicago is risky," Dad cautioned. "You should rent until you're more established." "Jake's situation is different," Mom explained. "He needs stability with his training schedule." I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and cried silently for exactly 2 minutes. Then I washed my face, reapplied my makeup, and made a decision that would shape the next decade of my life. I would succeed without them, and I would do it so thoroughly they couldn't ignore it. That night, I revised my 5-year plan into something more ambitious. I would focus exclusively on high-end properties, leverage my knowledge of undervalued neighborhoods, and build a portfolio that would make Tanya proud. And I would do it all, without my family's knowledge or support. 6 months later, I purchased my first property, a rundown 1-bedroom condominium, in a building that was about to undergo major renovations. The location was prime, and I knew from industry connections that a major tech company was opening offices nearby. I stretched myself financially, eating ramen noodles for months to make the payments work. When my mother called to ask about my little apartment, I kept my tone light and vague. "It's small but perfect for now. How's Jake's place coming along?" She spent the next 20 minutes describing his new furniture and renovation plans. I listened politely while reviewing investment projections on my laptop. I sold that first condominium 18 months later for nearly double my investment. By then, I'd been promoted twice at work and was managing my own client portfolio. No one in my family noticed or asked. 4 years after graduation, I was the youngest partner at Lakeshore Real Estate Group. My specialty had become identifying luxury properties with untapped potential. My client list included CEOs, professional athletes, and old-money Chicago families who trusted my judgment implicitly. "Sophia has an uncanny ability to predict market movements," my managing director told Chicago Business Monthly, in a profile they ran on rising stars in real estate. I kept that article hidden when I visited my parents' home. While Jake bounced between sports marketing jobs, struggling to find his footing in the professional world, I was working 80-hour weeks and building something substantial. Not that my family would know at our monthly dinners. They rarely asked about my work, and when they did, I kept my answers deliberately vague. "Still at that real estate place?" Dad would ask. "Yes, it's going well," I'd reply, before someone changed the subject to Jake's latest opportunity. During one particularly successful quarter, I closed deals on 4 luxury penthouse units in a new downtown development. My commission was substantial enough that I could have paid cash for a house in my parents' neighborhood. Instead, I created River North Holdings LLC, my first investment company, and began purchasing properties anonymously. My first major renovation project was a historic brownstone in Lincoln Park that I transformed into 3 luxury apartments. The return on investment exceeded even my optimistic projections. I expanded into commercial properties, acquiring a small office building in the West Loop just before the neighborhood exploded with tech companies and restaurants. "You should think about setting up your own firm," Tanya suggested during our monthly mentoring lunch. Now semi-retired, she followed my career with genuine pride. "You've outgrown being someone else's partner." 3 months later, I launched Williams Porter Real Estate, naming it partially after Tanya and my maternal grandmother. We specialized in luxury properties and high-return investments with a client waitlist that grew longer each month. I moved into a stunning Gold Coast penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, but drove a modest Audi when visiting my parents. Sophia seems to be doing okay. I overheard my mother telling a friend on the phone. She has a steady job at least. Not everyone can be as successful as Jake. By then, Jake had finally found his niche in sports equipment sales. He married Heather, a pharmaceutical sales representative, and they lived in a pleasant suburban home that my parents visited weekly. I saw them monthly at family dinners, where the conversation inevitably revolved around Jake's latest sales figures and Heather's company perks. I dated occasionally, but remained focused on my expanding business. My closest friend, Audrey, who knew the truth about my success, frequently urged me to be more open with my family. "I don't understand why you hide how well you're doing," she said during our weekly wine night at my penthouse. "You've achieved everything without their help. They should know." "What would be the point?" I replied, refilling our glasses. "They've decided who's the successful one in the family. Evidence won't change that." But the situation grew more complicated when I heard through industry channels that Jake was looking at properties in Highland Park, one of Chicago's most exclusive suburbs. "Something doesn't add up," my finance director, Marcus, noted when I mentioned it casually. "Based on the listed salaries for his position, he shouldn't qualify for homes in that price range." Curious, I had Marcus run a discrete financial analysis using publicly available information. The results were concerning. Jake appeared to be significantly overextending himself. "He's counting on continuous growth in his commission structure," Marcus explained. "If there's any downturn in sporting goods sales, he'll be underwater fast." I took this information and made a business decision that would later prove fateful. I purchased 2 adjacent properties in the Highland Park development where Jake was looking. Both were excellent investments regardless, with substantial appreciation potential. I made the purchases through my company, meaning my name wouldn't appear on any documents Jake might encounter during his own transaction. 3 months later, industry gossip confirmed Jake had purchased a 5-bedroom mansion in Highland Park, leveraging himself to an alarming degree. I authorized an anonymous bid on a property directly across the street from his new home, adding it to my growing portfolio. The monthly family dinners became increasingly difficult as Jake and Heather talked about their new home and moving plans. I maintained my practiced smile, while my parents beamed with pride at their son's apparent success. "Such a beautiful neighborhood," Mom gushed. "The best schools for when you two start a family." "Sophia, you should see the home office," Jake told me with genuine excitement. "You could fit your whole apartment in there." I nodded pleasantly, not bothering to correct his assumption about my living situation. "It sounds wonderful." What none of them knew was that I now owned 3 properties surrounding Jake's new mansion, all purchased at better terms than he'd managed to secure. Nor did they know that my company had recently acquired a significant stake in the mortgage lender that financed Jake's purchase. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my family continued to view me as barely making ends meet, I had become intimately familiar with my brother's precarious financial situation without his knowledge. I could have felt vindicated, but mostly I felt a lingering sadness that our relationship had never developed into the supportive sibling bond I'd wanted as a child. As Jake's moving date approached, the tension within me grew. Years of dismissal and overlooked achievements had created a reservoir of resentment I tried to suppress. I continued my therapy sessions, working through my complicated family dynamics with Dr. Lawson. "What would acknowledgement from them give you that you don't already have?" she asked during one session. I considered the question seriously. Nothing tangible. I've built everything without them. But emotionally, I guess I still want them to see me. And if they never do, then I need to accept that and stop hoping for something that won't happen. Little did I know that the monthly dinner approaching would force the issue in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The invitation to the monthly family dinner came with unusual enthusiasm from my mother. "Make sure you're there this Sunday," she insisted over the phone. "We're celebrating Jake and Heather's move. The whole family will be there." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, marking it on my calendar with a sense of dread. Sunday morning found me standing in my walk-in closet, larger than my parents' master bedroom, trying to decide what to wear. My wardrobe contained designer labels and custom pieces that reflected my status in Chicago's business community, but for family gatherings, I deliberately chose understated items that wouldn't raise questions. I selected a simple navy blue dress from J. Crew and minimal jewelry, though I couldn't bring myself to remove the vintage Cartier watch that had been a gift to myself after closing my first major development deal. My parents wouldn't recognize its significance anyway. My phone chimed with a text from Audrey. "Good luck tonight. Remember, you have nothing to prove to them." Easy for her to say. She came from a family where achievements were celebrated equally, failures met with support rather than judgment. Before leaving my penthouse, I took a call from my assistant about a potential acquisition in the Gold Coast. The seller is motivated after the inspection revealed foundation issues, but our contractor thinks it's an easy fix. We could get it 20% below market. Make the offer, I decided, but include the inspection contingency to give us negotiating leverage. This was my real life, making multi-million-dollar decisions with confidence born from experience and success. Yet in 2 hours, I would sit at my parents' dining table, feeling like an underachieving teenager again. I drove my Audi rather than my Bentley, parking a block away from my parents' Evanston home. The street was lined with cars, confirming this was indeed a larger gathering than usual. Inside, the house bustled with extended family. Aunt Carol and Uncle Thomas greeted me warmly but briefly, before my mother whisked them away to show off the new family photos on the wall, mostly featuring Jake in various poses with Heather. I made my way to the kitchen for a glass of wine, where my father was holding court with my uncles, discussing Jake's new neighborhood. "Property values in Highland Park have increased 15% in just 3 years, he explained authoritatively, though I knew the actual figure was closer to 18% in the specific development where Jake had bought. Jake got in at exactly the right time. Always had a good head for investments. I bit my tongue and poured a generous glass of Cabernet. 3 of my properties in that same area had already appreciated 22% due to strategic improvements I'd made. Cousin Amelia approached, her expression sympathetic. "Sophia, I hear you're still at that real estate company. Are you enjoying it?" "It's fulfilling," I answered simply. "That's good. Not everyone needs to have a big career. Work-life balance is important too." I nodded politely, though my 70-hour work weeks certainly didn't qualify as balanced by most standards. Before I could respond, Amelia's attention was diverted by the arrival of Jake and Heather, entering with the fanfare usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. "There they are," Mom exclaimed, rushing to embrace them both. "Our Highland Park homeowners." Jake looked uncomfortable with the attention, something I'd noticed more in recent years. He caught my eye across the room and gave a small shrug that seemed almost apologetic. Heather carried a bottle of champagne, announcing it was to celebrate their new home. "We can't wait for everyone to see it once we're settled," she said, handing the bottle to my father. "We've already picked out the furniture for the guest rooms." I sipped my wine and observed the family dynamics playing out like a well-rehearsed play. My mother positioning Jake and Heather in the center of the living room, my father beaming with paternal pride, relatives gathering around to hear details about square footage and neighborhood amenities. I found myself relegated to the periphery, as usual, watching rather than participating. This familiar position had once filled me with longing to be included. Now, after years of therapy and self-reflection, I recognized it as freedom. Standing apart gave me clarity about the family patterns that had shaped my childhood, but didn't need to define my adulthood. "Sophia, come help me in the kitchen," my mother called, and I dutifully followed her to help carry dishes to the dining table. As we arranged the food, she kept up a running commentary about Jake's new home. 5 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms, and the master suite has a sitting area bigger than some apartments. "He's done so well for himself." "It sounds impressive," I replied neutrally. "We're just so proud of how he's established himself," she continued. "Your father and I were just saying, it's such a comfort knowing at least one of our children is financially secure." The casual cruelty of her words stung despite my success. In her mind, I remained the struggling daughter they needed to worry about, regardless of evidence to the contrary. As everyone gathered around the dining table, I noticed I'd been seated at the far end, away from the center where Jake and my parents Saturday. The seating arrangement was a perfect metaphor for my position in the family hierarchy. Through the appetizer course, conversation centered on Jake's new promotion at work and Heather's company's expansion plans. I listened and nodded at appropriate intervals, a skill perfected over years of these gatherings. "Sophia," Uncle Thomas said during a brief lull, "what have you been up to lately? Still showing houses to people?" Before I could answer, my mother interjected. "Sophia's still figuring things out, but she's always welcome to stay with us if she needs to." The implication that I might need financial rescue hung in the air. I opened my mouth to correct her misunderstanding, but was interrupted by my father launching into a detailed description of how he had helped Jake negotiate the purchase of his mansion. "The seller initially wouldn't budge on price," he explained proudly. "But I suggested Jake mention the needed roof repairs, and suddenly they were much more reasonable. Saved him $50,000 with just one conversation." I knew from my industry connections that the roof had been replaced just 3 years ago and was in excellent condition. Either the seller had misrepresented things to Jake, or my father was embellishing his role. Neither would surprise me. "We have pictures of the house," Heather announced, pulling out her phone. "Let me show everyone." The phone was passed around the table as relatives exclaimed over the sprawling mansion with its imposing facade and expansive grounds. When it reached me, I recognized the property immediately. It was directly adjacent to one of my holdings in the neighborhood, a fact that caused me to smile involuntarily. "What's so funny?" my mother asked sharply. "Nothing," I replied. "It's a beautiful home." "Well, not everyone can afford something like this at 30, she said. "Jake has always been exceptional." I took another sip of wine as Aunt Carol asked about the neighborhood amenities. Jake described the community pool, tennis courts, and walking trails, while Heather detailed their landscaping plans. I could have added that the community association fees were increasing by 30% next year to cover infrastructure improvements, but kept that information to myself. As dinner progressed, I caught fragments of conversation between my mother and Aunt Carol that made my stomach tighten. "We worry about Sophia financially," my mother said in a voice just loud enough for me to hear. "Jake's offered to help, but she's too proud. Some people just take longer to find their footing," Aunt Carol replied sympathetically. My father leaned in, adding, "Some people just aren't cut out for business like Jake is. Sophia's got other qualities." Heat rushed to my face. After years of dismissal, their continued underestimation still had the power to hurt me. I focused on cutting my roast beef into perfectly even pieces, using the mechanical action to regain my composure. "Jake and Heather were just telling us about their guest wing," my mother announced to the table at large. "It has its own entrance and bathroom, perfect for visitors." Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It's just a spare bedroom with an attached bath, Mom. You're making it sound like a separate apartment." "Still, it's very generous of you to offer it to Sophia while she's between places," she continued, as if he hadn't spoken. The table went quiet. I looked up from my plate in confusion. "I'm sorry? We've been so worried about you in that dangerous downtown neighborhood," my mother explained, her voice dripping with concern that felt more performative than genuine. "Your father and I were just telling everyone how you've been barely making rent with that commission-only job." My father nodded solemnly. "Times are tough in real estate right now. We understand that." Across the table, Jake looked mortified. "Mom," I never said. "It's nothing to be embarrassed about, dear," my mother cut him off, patting his hand before turning back to me. "We think you should take Jake and Heather up on their generous offer. Stay in their guest wing until you get back on your feet. Family helps family." The dining room fell silent as everyone turned expectantly toward me. Some faces showed pity, others curiosity about how I would respond to this public offering of charity. Jake and Heather exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly ambushed by my parents' announcement. In that moment, something crystallized within me. This pattern would continue indefinitely unless I chose to break it. The careful separation I'd maintained between my professional success and my family identity had protected me from their judgment, but had also enabled their continued misperception. I took a deliberate sip of water, set down my glass, and smiled calmly. For the first time in years, I felt absolute clarity about what needed to be said. "Thank you for the concern," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "And thank you, Jake and Heather, for what I'm sure was a well-intentioned offer. But I'm actually quite comfortable in my current living situation." My mother's smile tightened. "Darling, there's no need to be proud. We all go through rough patches." "I'm not going through a rough patch," I continued. "In fact, I own my residence outright. No mortgage." A confused murmur rippled through the table. My father chuckled nervously. "A studio apartment isn't exactly an achievement, Sophia. Jake owned his first condo at your age." "Actually," I said, reaching for my phone, "I don't live in a studio apartment. I live in a 3,000 square foot penthouse in the Gold Coast with views of Lake Michigan." I pulled up photos of my home and slid the phone toward the center of the table. "I purchased it 2 years ago after my company exceeded $10 million in annual revenue." "Your company?" My mother echoed, her forehead creasing. "Williams Porter Real Estate. I'm the founder and CEO. We specialize in luxury properties and high-return investments throughout Chicago and the North Shore." My father's face flushed. "This is hardly the time for jokes, Sophia. I assure you, it's not a joke." I scrolled to a recent article from Chicago Business Magazine featuring my company. "We were named one of the fastest-growing private firms in Illinois last year." Aunt Carol leaned forward to peer at my phone. "My God, that is you on the cover." "Sophia," my mother interrupted, her voice strained. "If you've been doing well, why wouldn't you tell us?" I looked directly at her. "Would you have believed me? You've spent years telling relatives I'm struggling, without ever actually asking about my career." Uncomfortable silence descended on the table. Jake cleared his throat. "How long have you been running your own company?" 4 years now. Before that, I was the youngest partner at Lakeshore Real Estate Group." I turned back to my parents. "Remember when I tried to tell you about my promotion 5 years ago, and you changed the subject to Jake's new car?" My mother blinked rapidly, her certainty visibly faltering. "We've always supported both our children. Financially, you supported Jake," I said without accusation, just stating facts. "You helped with his college expenses, co-signed for his first condo, and contributed to his down payment. You told me I needed to make my own way." "We thought that's what you wanted," my father protested, his voice rising defensively. "What I wanted was equal treatment. What I got was invisibility." I kept my tone measured, determined not to let emotion overcome the facts. But it worked out. I built everything myself. My company manages over $300 million in real estate assets. The silence that followed was deafening. Relatives exchanged glances, reevaluating years of family narrative in real time. My mother attempted to regain control of the situation. "Well, we always knew you'd find your way eventually. You were always so independent." I smiled thinly. "Independent by necessity, not by choice." Jake, surprisingly, came to my defense. "Mom, Dad, you have to admit you've always treated us differently. I've benefited from it, but that doesn't make it right." My mother's eyes widened at this unexpected betrayal. Heather nodded in agreement, adding, "Sophia's achievements are incredible. We should be celebrating her success too." "Speaking of Highland Park," I continued, seeing an opening to complete the revelation, "I'm actually quite familiar with your new neighborhood, Jake." "You've visited the area?" he asked. "In a manner of speaking, I own properties there." I scrolled through my phone to a map of the development. Specifically, I own the 2 lots adjacent to your new home and the property directly across the street. A collective gasp went around the table. My father's face paled. "That's not possible. River North Holdings purchased those properties 6 months ago. River North Holdings is one of my investment companies." I turned to Jake. "I heard through industry channels that you were looking in that development and became curious about the investment potential. They're excellent properties. Jake stared at me for a long moment before a smile slowly spread across his face. I always thought you were the smart one in the family. My mother made a final attempt to incorporate this new reality into her existing worldview. Well, of course, we always knew Sophia had potential. We just express our support differently for different children. Mom, Jake said gently but firmly, you can't rewrite history here. You and Dad consistently prioritized my achievements and dismissed Sophia's. I noticed it even as a kid, but it benefited me, so I stayed quiet. That was wrong of me. My father leaned forward, his expression suddenly calculating. Sophia, if you're doing as well as you claim, perhaps we could discuss some investments I've been considering for retirement. The naked opportunism of his pivot made even Aunt Carol wince. Before I could respond, Jake stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Are you serious right now? He demanded, looking at our father. You just found out your daughter is incredibly successful after years of dismissing her, and your first thought is how you can benefit from it. My father had the grace to look ashamed. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, tears appearing on cue. We're just trying to process all this. Sophia should have told us sooner. Would it have mattered? I asked quietly. When I made partner at 30, the youngest in the firm's history, I called to tell you. You said that's nice, and immediately started talking about Jake's sales bonus. The table fell uncomfortably silent. Aunt Carol, always one to speak her mind, lifted her wine glass. Well, I'd like to propose a toast to Sophia's remarkable achievements. Building a successful company entirely on your own is extraordinary. Other relatives murmured agreement, lifting their glasses. My father and mother reluctantly joined, their expressions still processing this seismic shift in family dynamics. Actually, I said, setting down my glass, there's one more thing you should know. I looked directly at Jake. The mortgage company that approved your home loan? My investment group acquired a controlling interest in their parent company last year. Jake's eyes widened. Are you saying your mortgage application crossed my desk for final approval? I smiled at his shocked expression. Don't worry, I made sure you got the best possible terms. Wait, my father interrupted. You knew about Jake's house purchase before today? I knew he was overextending himself financially, I acknowledged. The debt-to-income ratio on that mortgage is concerning. But I approved it because I knew I could help if necessary. Jake looked stunned. You've known about my financial situation all this time? I run a real estate investment company, Jake. Financial analysis is what I do. I glanced around the table, where relatives were hanging on every word of this unexpected family drama. Maybe we should continue this conversation privately. No, my mother said firmly. If we're finally being honest, let's be honest here and now. You're saying Jake's house is too expensive for him? I sighed. What I'm saying is that the mortgage terms require his income to increase by at least 15% annually for the next 5 years to remain comfortably affordable. That's an aggressive assumption. Jake ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely distressed. My financial advisor said it was manageable. Your financial advisor works on commission, I pointed out gently. He benefits from you taking larger loans. Heather looked at her husband with concern. Jake, you told me we were well within our budget. I thought we were, he said, his confident facade crumbling. I hadn't meant to expose Jake's financial vulnerability, only to establish my own professional credibility. Seeing his distress, I softened my approach. It's not a crisis situation. The house is in an excellent location, and property values in that development are projected to increase substantially. You just need a more realistic payment strategy. Can you help us with that? Jake asked, surprising me with his directness and lack of pride. Of course, I agreed without hesitation. That's literally my job. My mother, struggling to process this complete reversal of the established family narrative, interjected, I don't understand why you kept all this secret from us, Sophia. We're your family. Before I could respond, Jake answered for me. Because we never gave her reason to think we'd believe her or value her success. He looked at me with newfound respect. I'm sorry, Sophia. I contributed to that problem. The dinner that had begun as another exercise in invisibility had transformed into something I couldn't have anticipated. A moment of truth that exposed decades of family dynamics. As relatives processed this new reality, adjusting their perception of both Jake and me, I felt an unexpected lightness. The weight of pretense had been exhausting to maintain. Aunt Carol broke the tension with her characteristic bluntness. Well, this is certainly the most interesting family dinner we've had in years. Sophia, I'd love to hear more about your company when you have time. Other relatives joined in with genuine questions about my work, my investments, and my perspective on the real estate market. For the first time in memory, I became the focus of family attention, not out of pity or concern, but with authentic interest and respect. My father remained largely silent, his worldview visibly shaken. My mother alternated between attempts to claim partial credit for my success. We always encouraged you to be independent, and struggling to reconcile her previous narrative with the impressive reality. As dessert was served, Jake raised his glass. I'd like to propose a real toast to Sophia, who accomplished everything without the support I took for granted. I have a lot to learn from my little sister. The genuine pride in his voice brought unexpected tears to my eyes. This, I realized, was all I had ever wanted. Simple acknowledgement and respect from my family. The fact that it came first from Jake rather than my parents felt fitting somehow. As relatives clinked glasses and conversations splintered into smaller groups, I caught Jake's eye across the table. He mouthed, "We need to talk," with a seriousness that suggested he wanted more than a superficial reconciliation. I nodded, feeling cautiously optimistic that something valuable might emerge from this evening of revelations. The family patterns established over decades wouldn't change overnight, but the truth had finally broken through, creating an opportunity for something different, something better to develop in its place. After the explosive revelations at dinner, the evening dissolved into fragmented conversations and early departures. Relatives who had witnessed the dramatic shift in family narrative made polite excuses to leave, eager to discuss what they'd witnessed once safely in their cars. My parents moved mechanically through goodbyes, their social masks firmly in place despite the seismic shift that had occurred. I helped clear dishes, an ingrained habit from childhood, while processing what had just happened. The simple act of speaking my truth had altered something fundamental in the family dynamic. Whether that change would prove temporary or lasting remained to be seen. "I'll call you tomorrow," Jake said quietly as he and Heather prepared to leave. "There's a lot we should talk about." I nodded, suddenly exhausted from the emotional expenditure of the evening. I'd like that. My parents barely spoke as the house emptied. My mother busied herself with unnecessary rearranging of leftovers, while my father retreated to his den, the door closing with deliberate finality. I recognized the pattern from childhood. Emotional withdrawal was their response to any disruption of their preferred narrative. "I should go," I said, collecting my purse. My mother looked up, her expression unreadable. "You could have told us, Sophia. We would have been proud." The simplicity of her statement, delivered without acknowledgement of why I hadn't shared my success, told me everything about how much work remained, if our relationship was ever to heal. Rather than engage in what would surely become a circular conversation, I kissed her cheek and left. The drive back to my penthouse felt surreal. For years, I had maintained the separation between my family life and professional success with careful compartmentalization. That boundary had dissolved completely in a single evening. Audrey called as I was unlocking my door. "Well, how was the family dinner from hell?" "It was actually quite revealing," I replied, kicking off my shoes and pouring myself a bourbon. I told them everything. "Everything? Everything?" she gasped. "The company, the penthouse, the properties?" "All of it. Including that I own the properties surrounding Jake's new mansion." "Holy shit, Sophia. What prompted that?" I explained the dinner confrontation, my mother's charitable offer of Jake's guest room, and the breaking point it had created. "Their faces when you revealed the truth, I would have paid to see that," Audrey said with satisfaction. How did Jake take it? Surprisingly well, actually. Better than our parents. I sank onto my sofa, the events of the evening catching up with me. He wants to talk tomorrow. I think he feels guilty about benefiting from their favoritism all these years. As he should, Audrey said firmly. What about your parents? Processing, I think. Dad's first instinct was to ask if I could help with his retirement investments. Audrey's disgusted snort made me smile despite my exhaustion. Classic. They ignore your success until they can benefit from it. Pretty much. Listen, I'm completely drained. Can we catch up tomorrow? After hanging up, I stood at my floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The city lights reflected on Lake Michigan, a view I had worked extraordinarily hard to earn. For the first time, my family knew the reality of my life and achievements. Whatever happened next, I would no longer live a divided existence. My phone rang early the next morning, Jake, asking if we could meet for coffee. I suggested a cafe near my office, and he agreed immediately. When I arrived, Jake was already seated in a corner booth, looking uncharacteristically nervous. He stood as I approached, awkwardly offering a hug instead of our usual perfunctory greeting. Thanks for meeting me, he said as we settled with our coffees. Last night was intense. That's one word for it, I agreed. Jake fiddled with his cup, clearly struggling to organize his thoughts. I need to apologize to you, not just for last night, but for our whole lives. You don't need to. I do, actually. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I knew Mom and Dad treated us differently. I always knew it, and I let it happen because it benefited me. The simple admission, delivered without excuses, surprised me. We were kids, Jake. The pattern was established by our parents, but I became an adult and still accepted it. He shook his head. The scholarships, the car, the condo down payment, I took it all while watching them tell you to make your own way. That was wrong. His sincerity was unexpected and disarming. For years, I had harbored resentment toward Jake as well as my parents. Facing his genuine remorse, I found that anger difficult to maintain. I had no idea how successful you've become, he continued. That company profile Aunt Carol looked up after dinner. Sophia, what you've built is incredible, and you did it without the advantages I had. I had other advantages, I acknowledged. Mentors who believed in me, opportunities I worked hard for. It wasn't all hardship. Still, I want you to know I'm proud of you. Jake's voice grew serious, and I'm embarrassed about my own financial situation. You were right about the mortgage. We're stretched thin, and I've been losing sleep over it. The vulnerability in his admission created an opening for the kind of honest relationship we'd never had. I can help you restructure things, I offered. Create a sustainable payment plan. Would you? Heather's been worried sick since last night. She had no idea we were so overextended. Of course. That's literally what I do for clients every day. I pulled out my tablet and opened a financial planning application. Let's start with your current income and expenses. For the next hour, Jake and I worked through his financial situation with a level of transparency that would have been unimaginable before last night's revelations. He had indeed overextended himself, partly due to poor advice and partly from pressure to maintain an appearance of success. Mom and Dad always bragged about my accomplishments, he admitted. I felt like I couldn't disappoint them by living below the standard they expected. That's a heavy burden to carry, I observed, seeing my brother clearly perhaps for the first time, always having to be the golden child. Jake nodded, looking relieved to be understood. Exactly. Meanwhile, I always thought you had it easier without those expectations. I laughed softly at the irony. I would have given anything for some of that positive attention and support, and I would have given anything for the freedom to fail occasionally, without feeling like I was letting everyone down. Jake shook his head. We were both shaped by their expectations, just in completely opposite ways. As we finished our financial planning session, Jake looked at his watch. I have a meeting, But there's something else I wanted to ask you. Would you be willing to see my house, your neighboring properties? Maybe give us some advice on improvements that would make sense financially? The invitation represented more than a real estate consultation. It was an acknowledgement of my expertise and an olive branch toward a new kind of relationship. I'd be happy to. How about this weekend? Perfect. Jake stood and hesitated before adding, Mom called this morning. She and Dad want to have dinner with just the two of us. To clear the air, she said. My stomach tightened at the prospect. Did you agree? I said I'd talk to you first. Jake's expression grew serious. If you don't want to, I'll decline for both of us. I think it's time we presented a united front. His loyalty, so long directed exclusively toward our parents, felt like a precious and fragile new development. Let's discuss it after I see your house. I need some time to think about it. Fair enough. Jake embraced me again before leaving, this hug feeling more natural than the first. For what it's worth, Sophia, I always admired you, even when I didn't show it. Later that afternoon, I received a text from an unknown number that turned out to be Heather. Thank you for helping Jake understand our financial situation. He's been different since last night. More honest, less concerned with appearances. Whatever you said made a difference. I was still considering how to respond when my office phone rang. The receptionist sounded uncomfortable. Miss Porter, your parents are here. They don't have an appointment, but they're insisting on seeing you. My pulse quickened. How did they even find my office? They said they looked up your company address online. Should I tell them you're in a meeting? I considered the easy escape, then decided against it. No, give me 5 minutes and then send them in. I quickly called my assistant to join us with her notepad, creating a business context for the unexpected visit. Then I straightened my desk, adjusted my designer suit jacket, and tried to center myself before what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation. When my parents entered my corner office with its panoramic views of downtown Chicago, their expressions revealed their shock at the tangible evidence of my success. My mother took in the expensive furnishings, industry awards on the walls, and framed magazine covers featuring my company, while my father stared at the scale model of my latest development project, dominating the conference table. Welcome to Williams Porter Real Estate, I said professionally, gesturing toward the seating area. This is Emily, my executive assistant. She'll be taking notes as I have another appointment shortly. The corporate formality was deliberate, creating boundaries around a conversation that might otherwise become emotionally unmanageable. My parents sat awkwardly on the leather sofa, looking out of place in my professional domain. Sophia, my mother began, her voice uncertain. We felt we needed to talk after last night. There seems to be some misunderstanding about our family relationships. I'm not sure what misunderstanding you're referring to, I replied evenly. I built a successful company. I chose not to discuss it at family gatherings where my professional achievements were historically minimized. My father cleared his throat. We always supported you, Sophia. Perhaps not financially, but in other ways. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to elaborate. When he couldn't provide specific examples, I continued, the past is the past. I've made peace with building my career without family support. The question is, where we go from here. We're your parents, my mother said, a familiar note of entitlement entering her voice. Nothing changes that. We expect to be included in your life, especially now that we know about your situation. The phrasing was telling my success reduced to a situation rather than an achievement worthy of pride. My situation, as you call it, is the result of thousands of hours of work, strategic risk-taking, and professional development. It wasn't an accident or a windfall. Of course, dear, she replied dismissively. What we're saying is that families should share in each other's good fortune. We always included you in celebrations of Jake's successes. The breathtaking lack of self-awareness nearly made me laugh. You included me as an audience member, not as an equal participant in family support. My father leaned forward, changing tactics. Sophia, we're getting older. Your mother and I have been thinking about downsizing from the family home. Perhaps you could help us find something suitable, with your connections. Maybe in Highland Park, near Jake? The naked opportunism confirmed what I had suspected. They hadn't come to apologize or understand, but to position themselves to benefit from my newly revealed resources. Before I could respond, Emily's timer discreetly chimed. "I'm afraid I have another appointment," I said, standing. "But I appreciate you coming by. It's given me clarity about our relationship moving forward." "What does that mean?" my mother asked, her expression wary. "It means I'll need to see meaningful change before I can consider financial entanglements of any kind." I walked them toward the door. I would have appreciated acknowledgement of my accomplishments or an apology for years of dismissal. Instead, you came with expectations of what I could do for you. My father's face reddened. "Now wait just a minute. Parents shouldn't need to apologize for raising their children as they see fit." "You're right," I agreed calmly. "And adult children don't need to provide financial benefits to parents who consistently devalued their achievements." I opened my office door. "I'll see you at the next family dinner." After they left, Emily looked at me with concern. "Are you okay?" That seemed intense. "Actually, I am." I felt lighter somehow. Boundaries finally established after years of silent acquiescence. For the first time, I think they're seeing me as I actually am, not as they've chosen to perceive me. Whether that recognition would lead to genuine relationship repair remained uncertain. But the truth had been spoken, the reality of our family dynamics exposed to the light. Whatever happened next would be built on honesty rather than comfortable illusions, and that alone represented significant progress. The weekend arrived with crisp autumn air and vibrant foliage painting Chicago's northern suburbs. I drove my Bentley to Highland Park, no longer concerned about maintaining appearances. The luxury vehicle felt appropriate for the neighborhood of expansive estates and manicured lawns where Jake had purchased his mansion. I arrived at his address, a property I knew intimately from my own investment research, and parked in the circular driveway. The house was undeniably impressive. A 6,000-square-foot colonial revival with white columns and black shutters against red brick. Professionally landscaped gardens surrounded the property, though I noted several expensive but ill-advised choices that would require substantial maintenance. Jake opened the door before I could ring the bell, his expression a mixture of pride and newfound self-consciousness. "Welcome to our humble abode," he joked, the irony intentional. "It's beautiful," I said sincerely, stepping into a 2-story foyer with a crystal chandelier. Great bones and excellent location. Heather emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Sophia, thank you for coming. We've been so excited to get your professional opinion." The genuine warmth in her greeting suggested Jake had shared our coffee conversation with her. The three of us toured the house, with Jake and Heather pointing out features while I mentally cataloged potential improvements and maintenance concerns. The property was indeed lovely, but showed signs of having been purchased more for impression than practical living. The previous owners did a cosmetic renovation before selling, I explained as we examined the kitchen with its gleaming but poorly constructed cabinetry. They focused on visual appeal rather than quality. "You'll want to budget for some replacements within 5 years." Jake nodded, taking notes on his phone. "That's exactly the kind of insight we need." The inspector didn't mention any of this. Most inspectors focus on code compliance and safety issues. They're not evaluating long-term value or maintenance costs. I opened and closed a few drawers, demonstrating the inferior slides. These things won't appear as problems for a few years, but planning ahead will prevent financial surprises. We continued through the house, my professional assessment gradually evolving into more personal conversation. Heather showed me the nursery they hoped to fill someday soon, while Jake proudly displayed his home office, indeed large enough to fit my first apartment, as he'd once claimed. "We went a bit overboard with the furniture budget," Heather admitted as we toured the formal living room with its designer pieces. Jake was determined to have everything perfect from day one. "My parents expected nothing less," Jake explained, a new self-awareness in his tone. They've already hosted 2 dinner parties here to show off their son's success to their friends. I recognized the pattern immediately. They did the same with your college graduation and first job. The achievements became extensions of their own identity rather than celebrations of yours. Jake looked surprised by my insight. Exactly. I never thought about it that way, but you're right. It was always about how my success reflected on them. After completing the house tour, we walked the grounds, which backed up to a wooded conservation area. I pointed out property line markers and explained the shared maintenance agreements with neighboring lots, 2 of which I owned through my investment company. So those are your properties, Jake said, gesturing to the adjacent undeveloped lots. What are your plans for them? Custom builds, eventually. The market for 7-figure homes has softened recently, so I'm waiting for the right timing. I smiled. I'm a patient investor. Heather brought iced tea to the patio, and we sat overlooking the expansive backyard. The conversation shifted naturally to the financial planning we'd started during our coffee meeting. We've been implementing your suggestions, Heather said. I had no idea how overextended we were until Jake showed me the numbers you worked up. I was trying to protect you from worry, Jake admitted, taking her hand. But that wasn't fair or smart. Financial transparency is essential in partnerships, I agreed, whether business or personal. Speaking of partnerships, Jake said, his expression growing serious, I wanted to run something by you. My company is expanding its corporate sales division. We need someone with strong financial analysis skills and real estate knowledge to help with our facility planning nationwide. It would be a consulting role, well compensated. I tilted my head, surprised by the professional overture. Are you offering me a job? Jake laughed. God, no. I couldn't afford you. I'm asking if your company would consider taking us on as a client. It would be good business for both of us. The proposal was unexpected but intriguing, a professional collaboration that would have been unimaginable before our recent revelations. Send me the details. I'll have my team evaluate if it's a good fit. As we continued chatting, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Jake tensed immediately. I didn't invite them, he said quickly. I swear. Our parents emerged from their sedan, my mother carrying what appeared to be a casserole dish. Their unannounced arrival created an immediate shift in atmosphere, the relaxed conversation replaced by palpable tension. We thought we'd surprise you with lunch, my mother called cheerfully, as if the confrontations of the past week had never occurred. Oh, Sophia, you're here too. What a lovely coincidence. The carefully casual tone told me this was no coincidence at all. They had either assumed or confirmed I would be visiting and had orchestrated this spontaneous visit accordingly. Jake shot me an apologetic glance before greeting our parents with noticeably less enthusiasm than they clearly expected. Heather dutifully helped my mother with the food while my father surveyed the property with proprietary satisfaction. Quite a place you've got here, son, he said, clapping Jake on the shoulder. You've done the family proud. The familiar refrain landed differently in light of our recent revelations. Jake's smile tightened. Actually, Dad, Sophia was just giving us some excellent advice about property maintenance and financial planning. Did you know she manages over $300 million in real estate assets? My father's expression flickered between dismissal and calculation. Yes. Well, she mentioned something about that at dinner. It wasn't something, Dad, Jake pressed. She built a major company from scratch while we were all treating her like she was barely getting by. My mother emerged from the house, obviously having overheard. We're all very impressed with Sophia's unexpected success, she said with strained brightness, though I still don't understand why all the secrecy was necessary. I maintained my professional composure, determined not to be drawn into a defensive position. It wasn't secrecy, Mom. It was establishing professional independence without family assumptions clouding business relationships. Family assumptions? She echoed, her voice rising slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Jake interceded, surprising me with his directness. It means you and Dad always assumed I was the successful one, and Sophia was struggling. You never gave her credit or support. and now you're having trouble adjusting to reality. The blunt assessment from Jake, rather than me, carried different weight. Our parents looked genuinely taken aback by their golden child's criticism. "We came to make peace," my father said stiffly, "to put all this unpleasantness behind us." "Without acknowledgement or apology?" I asked quietly. "That's not peace. It's sweeping truth under the rug." My mother's expression hardened. "I don't know what's happened to both of you. We raised you better than to speak to your parents this way." "Actually," Jake replied with unexpected firmness, "Sophia is helping me understand that some of how we were raised wasn't particularly healthy. The constant comparison, the uneven support, the conditional approval." Our parents exchanged alarmed glances, clearly unprepared for a united front from their children. My father attempted to regain control of the narrative. "We gave you both every advantage." "You gave Jake every advantage," I corrected calmly. "You gave me challenges that ultimately made me stronger. But let's not pretend the support was equal." "We're not having this conversation in the driveway," my mother declared, attempting to move everyone inside where she would have home field advantage through food and familiar family patterns. "Actually," Jake said, stepping forward, "I don't think we're having this conversation today at all. Heather and I have plans with Sophia. We appreciate you thinking of us, but this isn't a good time." The unprecedented rejection of their unannounced visit left my parents momentarily speechless. My father recovered first. "I see how it is. Sophia's turned you against us now that you know about her money." The accusation was so wildly off base that I couldn't help laughing, which only increased his indignation. "Dad," Jake said with remarkable patience, "Sophia hasn't turned me against anyone. She's helped me understand our family dynamics more clearly. If you want to have a real conversation about that, I'm open to it, but not through ambush visits, and not without some serious self-reflection from both of you." My mother's eyes filled with strategic tears. "After everything we've done for you." "That's exactly the problem," Jake continued, his resolve visibly strengthening. "You see your parenting as creating obligation rather than connection. Every advantage you gave me came with the expectation that I would validate your choices and perpetuate the family narrative." His insight stunned me. My brother, who I had always seen as the unconscious beneficiary of our parents' favoritism, had been more aware than I realized, and perhaps more trapped by their expectations. My father turned to me, anger replacing his earlier calculation. "I suppose you're satisfied now. You've always been jealous of our relationship with Jake." "Actually, Dad, I've always wanted a healthier relationship with all of you," I replied, refusing to accept his framing. One based on mutual respect, rather than predetermined roles. "That's still possible, but it requires change from everyone, including me." "We're too old to change," my mother declared, collecting her casserole dish from Heather with a martyred expression. "You'll understand when you have children of your own." As they prepared to leave, visibly unsettled by the failed attempt to reestablish the old dynamics, Jake added, "We love you both. That's not in question. What Sophia and I are asking for is a relationship built on who we actually are, not who you've decided we should be." After they drove away, the three of us returned to the patio in silence. Finally, Heather spoke with obvious admiration. "I've never seen you stand up to them like that, Jake." He looked thoughtful. "I've never felt entitled to until now. Growing up as the favorite creates its own kind of prison. You become afraid of losing that position if you challenge anything, while being the unfavorite gives you nothing to lose by speaking truth," I added. "It's an interesting balance." Jake reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm sorry it took me so long to recognize what was happening. I benefited from it, so I had no incentive to question it. We were both doing the best we could within the system we were given," I said, feeling a newfound compassion for my brother's experience. "The question is, what kind of relationship we want to build going forward." "An honest one," he said without hesitation. "As business associates, as siblings, as family. No more pretense, no more prescribed roles." The simplicity of his answer contained profound potential for transformation. For the first time, I could envision a genuine connection with my brother, based on mutual respect rather than competition or resentment. Whether our parents could adapt to this new reality remained uncertain, but Jake and I had taken the first crucial steps toward healing. As I prepared to leave, Jake walked me to my car. "They'll come around eventually," he said, though his tone suggested more hope than conviction. "They don't have much choice if they want to remain part of our lives." "Maybe," I replied, "but we need to be prepared for the possibility that they can't make that adjustment. Some people would rather lose relationships than relinquish their narrative." "Then that's their loss," Jake said with newfound clarity, "because both of their children are pretty exceptional in their own ways." I drove home with a lighter heart than I'd felt in years. The path forward with my parents remained unclear, but the authentic connection beginning with Jake and Heather represented healing I hadn't dared to hope for. Sometimes, I reflected, the family we need isn't necessarily the one we're born into, but the one we create through honesty, boundary setting, and mutual respect. The truth had been painful, but ultimately liberating. By refusing to continue the pretense of struggling while my brother flourished, I had created the possibility for genuine relationship, not only with Jake, but potentially with my parents as well, if they proved capable of growth. And if not, I had built a life rich with meaningful connections, professional fulfillment, and hard-won self-respect that no one could diminish. 6 months passed with remarkable transformations in both my professional and personal life. Williams Porter Real Estate expanded into commercial development with a prestigious project in Chicago's West Loop, while my private investment portfolio continued to outperform market projections. But the most significant changes occurred in my family relationships, evolving in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Jake and I developed a genuine sibling bond, meeting weekly for lunch to discuss everything from business strategies to childhood memories, reinterpreted through our new understanding of family dynamics. His company became a client of my firm, creating a professional relationship that complemented our personal connection. With my guidance, he and Heather implemented a sustainable financial plan that eliminated their anxiety about the Highland Park mansion without requiring drastic lifestyle changes. My relationship with our parents developed more slowly, with careful boundaries and occasional setbacks. After several failed attempts to reestablish old patterns, they reluctantly began to accept that their children had fundamentally changed the family dynamic. Meaningful progress started when my father asked for my professional advice about downsizing from the family home, a genuine request rather than a manipulative tactic. "We're thinking of moving to a condo," he explained during a coffee meeting that felt more like a client consultation than a family discussion. "Something with less maintenance as we get older." "That's smart planning," I replied, maintaining my professional demeanor. "I can recommend several developments with strong appreciation potential and appropriate amenities." He hesitated before adding, "Your mother and I have been talking. We realize we may have misunderstood some things about your career path." It wasn't quite an apology, but it represented more self-reflection than I'd previously witnessed. "I appreciate that acknowledgement," I said carefully. Small steps accumulated gradually. My mother began asking specific questions about my business, instead of changing the subject. My father stopped comparing Jake and me, treating our different career paths as equally valid. They still struggled with old habits, occasionally lapsing into familiar patterns, but showed genuine effort to adapt to our new terms of engagement. Today marked a significant milestone: the housewarming party for my latest development project, a luxury building in Lincoln Park, where I had reserved the penthouse unit for myself. The guest list included business associates, friends, and for the first time my entire family, invited into my authentic life, rather than the diminished version I had previously shared with them. I surveyed the expansive space with satisfaction as my staff made final preparations. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic city views, while the interior showcased my preference for clean lines and understated elegance. This home represented not just financial success but personal integration. No more compartmentalizing different aspects of my identity. Audrey arrived first, whistling appreciatively as she explored the space. "You've outdone yourself with this one, Sophia. It's absolutely stunning." "It feels right," I agreed, accepting the champagne flute a server offered. No more hiding or downplaying my success. "Speaking of which, how are things with the family these days? Any progress?" "Incremental but real," I replied. "Jake and Heather have been amazing. My parents are trying. It's a process." "Well, inviting them here is a big step," Audrey observed. The full Sophia Porter experience with no filters. Guests began arriving: business partners, clients, industry colleagues, all people who knew me as the confident, successful CEO, rather than the overlooked daughter or inadequate sister. I moved through conversations with ease, discussing market projections and development strategies in the professional element I had created for myself. Jake and Heather arrived, bringing an expensive bottle of wine and genuine warmth. "This place is incredible," Jake said, embracing me. "Even better than the blueprints you showed me." "The investment opportunity in this building is still excellent," I told him. "If you're interested in diversifying your portfolio," he laughed. Always the businesswoman. "But yes, Heather and I have been discussing it. The rental potential alone makes it worth considering." Watching Jake discuss investment strategy with my finance director, I marveled at how naturally he had adapted to our new relationship dynamic. He seemed more relaxed, less performative, since stepping out of the golden child role and establishing an identity based on authentic connection rather than parental approval. The arrival of my parents created a momentary tension in the room. They stood in the entryway, visibly overwhelmed by the sophisticated gathering and luxurious surroundings. My father adjusted his tie nervously, while my mother clutched her handbag, both looking out of place among the wealthy investors and real estate professionals. I approached them with professional courtesy, determined to help them navigate this new territory. "Mom, Dad, I'm glad you could make it. Let me show you around." "This is all yours?" my mother asked, her voice hushed as she took in the expansive space and dramatic views. "The penthouse unit and 20% ownership of the building," I confirmed. "It's my company's 4th development project." My father nodded, his expression a mixture of discomfort and dawning respect. "It's very impressive, Sophia. You've clearly done well for yourself." The qualified praise represented progress from his previous dismissal. I accepted it with a gracious nod and introduced them to several business associates, carefully selecting people who would make them feel included rather than intimidated. As the evening progressed, I observed my parents gradually relaxing. My mother engaged in conversation with several of my female executives, while my father examined the building plans displayed in the study with genuine interest. They were making an effort awkward and imperfect, but sincere. During a quiet moment by the windows, my mother approached alone, champagne glass in hand. "I wanted to say something to you privately," she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I've been doing some thinking since our difficulties began." I waited, maintaining neutral expression. "I may not have been as supportive of your choices as I could have been," she continued carefully. "Your father and I had certain expectations about how success should look, and Jake's path fit that vision more easily than yours. It wasn't the full acknowledgement I might have wished for, but it represented more self-awareness than she had previously demonstrated." "Thank you for recognizing that," I said simply. "We're trying to understand this new arrangement," she added, gesturing vaguely to encompass the gathering. "It's not easy to change how you see your children after so many years." "I know," I acknowledged. "I'm not expecting overnight transformation, just willingness to see me as I actually am, not as you assumed I was." She nodded slowly. "You've built something remarkable here. I don't fully understand it all, but it's impossible not to see that now." Later, Jake pulled me aside near the catering setup. "Mom just told me she's proud of both her children," he reported with surprise. "I think that's the first time she's ever phrased it that way, not just proud of me, with you as an afterthought." "Baby steps," I I replied, but couldn't suppress a smile. As the evening wound down, I found myself on the terrace with Jake, Heather, and my parents, the core family unit, together in my space for the first time. The city lights sparkled below us, a visual reminder of how far I had come from that overlooked child seeking validation. "Sophia," my father said suddenly, "I owe you an apology." The unexpected words created immediate silence. My mother looked startled, Jake attentive. "When you were growing up," he continued with visible difficulty, "I didn't recognize your potential because it didn't look like what I expected success to be. I channeled resources and attention toward Jake because his path made sense to me. That was short-sighted." The acknowledgement, limited but genuine, touched something deep within me. "Thank you for saying that, Dad. Your mother and I have been talking about it a lot," he added. "We're not perfect, but we want to do better." "That's all any of us can do," I replied. "Learn and grow from our mistakes." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but something fundamental had shifted. The apology, however belated, created possibility for healing that had previously seemed unattainable. Later that week, I launched a mentorship program through my company, designed specifically for young women entering the real estate industry without family connections or financial support. My first mentee, Caroline, reminded me powerfully of myself 15 years earlier, determined, analytical, and navigating a challenging industry without structural advantages. "The most important thing I've learned," I told her during our initial meeting, "is that external validation can never replace self-belief. Build your success on your own terms, not someone else's definition." "That's why I applied to this program," she replied with refreshing directness. "I don't have family in this business or connections to leverage. I need to create my own path." "Then you've already mastered the first lesson," I said, recognizing in her the same determination that had carried me through years of invisibility. Success isn't just about financial achievements. It's about defining your worth independently of others' perceptions. 3 months after the housewarming, my company received a prestigious industry award for innovation in urban development. When the ceremony date was announced, I hesitated briefly before sending invitations to my parents. Their attendance wasn't necessary for my satisfaction with the achievement, but offering inclusion represented my own growth beyond past resentments. To my surprise, they not only attended, but arrived early, dressed appropriately for the upscale industry event. As I accepted the award, I spotted them in the audience, my mother wiping a tear, and my father applauding with unmistakable pride. Jake and Heather sat beside them, all four presenting a unified family presence I had once thought impossible. The family dinner the following Sunday had a different quality than our gatherings of the past. Conversation flowed more naturally, with my professional insights given equal weight to Jake's contributions. My parents still occasionally slipped into old patterns, my mother interrupting me to ask Jake an unrelated question, my father defaulting to familiar narratives but caught themselves more quickly, making visible efforts to correct course. "We're thinking of taking a river cruise through Europe next summer," my mother mentioned during dessert. "Jake and Heather are considering joining us for part of it." She paused before adding, "We'd love it if you could come too, Sophia, if your schedule permits." The invitation, extended without assumptions about my financial situation or availability, represented meaningful progress. "I'll check my calendar," I promised. The timing might work between the Wilson project completion and breaking ground in Wicker Park. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The painful confrontation at that fateful dinner had initiated a process of truth-telling and boundary setting that transformed not only how my family saw me, but how I saw myself. By refusing to continue participating in the established narrative, I had created space for a new story, one based on authenticity rather than assigned roles. The healing remained incomplete, the new patterns still fragile, and requiring conscious effort from all involved. My parents would likely never fully understand the impact of their differential treatment, and I would always carry some echo of that early invisibility. But we were moving forward with greater awareness and intention, which created possibility where none had existed before. My success had never depended on their recognition. I had built it myself, brick by brick, through talent, persistence, and strategic vision. But their belated acknowledgement allowed something else to develop, not the validation I had once desperately sought, but the potential for relationship based on who we actually were, rather than who they had decided we should be. The most valuable lesson emerged not from financial achievements, but from the courage to stand in my truth, despite lifelong patterns pushing me back into invisibility. By refusing to diminish my light to make others comfortable, I had illuminated possibilities not just for myself, but for my entire family system. True success, I had discovered, wasn't measured in square footage or investment returns, but in the courage to live authentically, despite fear of rejection. The mansion worth owning wasn't built of brick and marble, but of self-respect, boundaries, and the willingness to speak truth even when it disrupted comfortable illusions. Standing on my terrace that evening, looking out over the city I had helped shape through my developments, I felt profound gratitude for the journey, not despite its difficulties, but because of them. The challenges had forged resilience, the dismissal had fueled determination, and the eventual truth-telling had created possibility for genuine connection based on reality rather than roles. The real estate empire I had built was substantial and rewarding, but the most valuable development had been internal, the construction of an authentic self that needed no external validation to recognize its worth. That foundation, unlike any physical structure, would support whatever I chose to build next in business, in relationships, and in the continuing evolution of family dynamics based on truth rather than comfortable illusions. Have you ever experienced being underestimated by family or friends, only to surprise them with your accomplishments? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear this message of standing in your truth despite family expectations. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you courage in writing your own authentic story, whatever that may look like for you.